Thank you for joining the January 4th episode of the Iamblichus reading group. In tonight's episode, we explore the concepts of Sumbala and synthemata by way of dreams and visions. Iamblichus castigates his teacher Porphyry for sticking to reason and philosophy, whereas the true wisdom and knowledge of theurgy surpass dialectic and logic. Through dreams, prayers, incantations, gifts from the gods, we prepare ourselves for the ascent to the gods, like the magician in the Immortalization rite. Join the discussion as we continue to explore what theurgy is and how we can put it into practice. In passing, we question Mr. Crowley and his discontents. We position his remarks about meeting the guardian spirit in the context of Iamblichus's communal experiences of seeing the gods. Join us as we move ever closer to finding out what theurgy is. Everyone, welcome to the January 4th edition of the Iamblichus reading group. We have a full house tonight. We have Farjana, Matt, and Ryan. And I'm welcoming everyone who will be listening to the call to the 2024 New Year. I hope everyone had a good celebrations over the holiday season. And thanks for joining us tonight. So we've been talking about the immortalization rite, and I wanted to get into some of the aspects and the elements of theurgy that we find within this the immortalization rite. We talked last time about the nomina barbara and the voces magicae. I wanted to also kind of get into the other elements, including Sumbala and the synthemata. And, I'll go ahead and do some preliminary remarks about that, and then we can get into this discussion, more detailed discussion with the group. So in the text of the Immortalization rite, the magician describes meeting the gods. He or she is one who has been initiated into the Graeco-Egyptian magical tradition, has learned the secret passwords to ascend to the gods, how to find and solicit the plants to induce the vision which brings about the ascent, and how to mix them. All of that is part of the tradition, at least from what we can tell from this rite. So why all these magical trappings? What in this rite constitutes theurgy? What is theurgy? Can I just think myself into communion with the gods? And why not? Iamblichus takes up all of these issues as we've been reading in the Egyptian mysteries. At least in the Immortalization rite, it seems as though I need to break through to the other side, as Jim Morrison sings. I need to achieve a state of mind which makes me receptive to the gods and give me a way to interact with them. But Iamblichus' main protagonist, or actually his teacher, but also kind of his antagonist here, is Porphyry, and Porphyry definitely thinks that there are other ways besides theurgy. In fact, one of the reasons that he writes his letter to Anibo is to call into question whether theurgy is just either a preliminary and maybe even an unnecessary practice. And that falls within the question of, but isn't meditation or even philosophy possible as avenues for breaking through to the other side? After describing and explaining the different otherworldly entities that exist, Iamblichus tells Porphyry something really important, and it relates explicitly to this question. You can't think your way into communion with the gods, he tells his former teacher. And it's not ignorance that explains theurgy. Of course, that's kind of Porphyry kind of takes a swipe at theurgy and puts it at the level of either belief and ignorance rather than being a higher form of knowledge. And he says this as if theurgy is one of those exercises in sophistic reasoning Socrates used to make fun of. And Iamblichus retorts that no, theurgy is about knowledge, but it's knowledge of a different form than either dialectic or logic. So on page 115 of our reading in the Egyptian Mysteries, Iamblichus says, "What then would hinder those who are theoretical philosophers from enjoying a theurgic union with the gods? But the situation is not so," he says. "It is the accomplishment of acts not to be divulged and beyond all conception, and the power of the unutterable symbols, understood solely by the gods, which establishes theurgic union." And these symbols are the symbol, which I'll be taking up at the end of these remarks. So Iamblichus is striking out at the idea that philosophy can get us anywhere near union with the gods. No, we must perform certain acts that bring us closer to the gods, and these acts are not only, quote, not to be divulged, unquote, but also, quote, beyond all comprehension, unquote. We can't think our way into the company of the gods, assuming that that's a goal worth attaining. And to do so, we must somehow do something else that defies both logic and common sense, it would seem. Last time we discussed the nomina barbara and the voces magicae. We discussed them in terms of frequencies and sigils. I think these ways of understanding these sounds are true, but I also think there's a further aspect to them which brings into focus the different knowledge that Iamblichus is pointing to. That is, the incomprehensible nature of these sounds reflects the non-rational state of awareness that being in the presence of the gods involves. The fact that these syllables have no meaning in an ordinary sense takes our minds to different planes where things that make no sense begin to be meaningful in a very powerful way. Sounds and actions which, if we did them in an everyday setting, would make us look either stupid or perhaps even insane. Look at what the magician does when they come into contact with the gods. These are the sounds that they make. Thus, when you see that the world above is pure, and there none of the gods or angels is threatening you, expect a great crash of thunder to be heard, with the result that you are shocked. But you say again, "Silence, silence. I am a star wandering about with you, and shining forth out of the deep, the khu, the kertheuth." In any other setting, these words and actions look and sound like the actions of a mad person. But within this rite, in these circumstances, they do make sense. So we now know that the voces magicae and nomina barbara are important elements of theurgic ritual. But what are some of the other specific elements of theurgy that Iamblichus tells Porphyry are needed? Iamblichus writes, "For even when we are not engaged in intellection, the symbols themselves, by themselves, perform their appropriate work, and the ineffable power of the gods to whom these symbols relate itself recognizes the proper images of itself, not through being aroused by our thought. That is, theurgic words and actions are conferred by the gods. They are sacred, and we must perform these actions and say these sounds, or sounds like them, to experience the communication with the divine." Now, these thoughts are important because there is a big debate in the scholarly world about whether theurgy involves both these actions and contemplation or some combination of them. For Iamblichus, at least, it seems that theurgic action and ritual are indeed paramount. He says, "Hence it is not even chiefly through our intellection that divine causes are called into actuality, but it is necessary for these and all the best conditions of the soul and our ritual purity to pre-exist as auxiliary causes. But the things which properly arouse the divine will are the actual divine symbols, and so the attention of the gods is awakened by themselves, receiving from no inferior being any principle for themselves of their characteristic activity. Now we do have our work ahead of us. It might prove worthwhile to discuss what symbols are, as well as synthemata. These are the artifacts of theurgy. Grasping their meaning can perhaps help us to begin figuring out how we can identify them for our own purposes. A symbol in its most basic sense means something that stands for something else. A rose is a symbol of love, for example. We often encounter symbols in literature, and it seems that we resort to them when we communicate something that begins to get beyond the normal, routine ways of thinking we use to survive or get along in the world. Symbols begin to take on transcendental meaning when people try to communicate religious ideas. Here, symbols actually begin to try and communicate not just ideas but other realities or states of being, where we can sense and touch things in a new and wondrous way. I would suggest that theurgic symbols above all have all of these meanings, but enhanced in an exponential way. Here, symbols not only act like a transparent window through which you see things, but also act to bring those things into being. So in using the theurgic symbols, we are not just appealing to the mind and emotions, we are actually calling into being the realities that the symbols point to. This is done via appealing to the soul vehicle, which we will have to discuss in later discussions, also known as the okema. The nature of this vehicle is shrouded in mystery. It can be conceived of in supercognitive terms, but associated with a higher form of imagination. Something similar to what William Blake means when he says, to see infinity in a grain of sand. On the other hand, we could go one step further than Blake and see in it a more occult meaning, and find in it a reality beyond a reality, existing not simply in our imaginations, but existing nou exo huparike, outside of our minds, as Chaldean Oracle Fragment 1 says. It has an objective reality. Perhaps this is why Iamblichus calls invocational prayers symbols. On page 61, he says, and if one were to consider also how the hieratic prayer formula, and these are the invocations, the hieratic prayer formula, have been sent down to mortals by the gods themselves, and that they are the symbols of the gods themselves, and not known to anyone but them, and that in a way they possess the same power as the gods themselves. How could one any longer justly believe that such supplication is derived from the sense world, and is not divine and intellectual? Now, synthemata, on the other hand, these are even more difficult to categorize than even symbols. Our book defines them as various magical substances and combinations of substances that form the basis for theurgic practice. Iamblichus mentions physical items like rocks and feathers as instances of synthemata. I collect rocks and sometimes find feathers on my journey through life. Are these synthemata, according to Iamblichus? I think Iamblichus has something a little bit different and stranger even than these, even though I do have a fondness for thinking of my rocks and my feathers that I find as a form of synthemata. I recently heard about an aniconic beetle image statue of Aphrodite. Beetles are stones that have no shape, but they were revered throughout the Greek world as sacred embodiments of divine powers. Meteorites, at least, would seem to fit the rest of Iamblichus' statement when he says, such as have been sent down, synthemata, such as have been sent down hither by the Creator and Father of all, by means of which unutterable truths are expressed through secret symbols. beings beyond form, brought under the control of form, things superior to all image, reproduced through images, and all things brought to completion through one single divine cause, which itself so far transcends passions that reason is not even capable of grasping it. So here we have a further statement that Iamblichus makes about the higher realm of mind that he is speaking of. It's beyond reason, at least the reason that we use to get through everyday life and to survive. And what we need to attain that type of awareness, that type of consciousness, are what he calls these symbols and these synthemata. And that's what I have for tonight. Any comments?
I think it's a really interesting question. And I think the general, I mean, not question, I guess it's a really interesting topic. And I think the general theme of it definitely seems to go against a lot of attempts by, I think, modern people to secularize a lot of these practices. I think that they're, well, I don't just think, I've experienced, I've interacted with many people who are interested in, you know, magical practices, occult practices, theurgic practices, but are uncomfortable with the idea that symbols can be invested with power in any way outside of a personal association between a symbol and something that it refers to, that each individual person makes inside of their mind, like the type of reason that you use to get through the day, as you said. And because they're uncomfortable with it, they try to explain that part away by saying, well, oh, you know, you still do have to make this connection in your own mind. You just do it sneakily, or like we pretend that it's not us doing it because that's more effective. And I think that the overarching theme here about what these symbols and synthemata are doing as being invested with power actually by the gods in some way, or having some kind of a direct connection between the symbol and the power behind the symbol. It's useful, I think, to focus on his really strong and explicit assertion that this is not something that you're doing. This is not something that any one individual is doing inside of their brains.
I struggle with this because, as I've made fairly clear to you guys a lot of my sort of synthemata that I do use in my own practice are my own, for lack of a better term. I'm a big, so like, to use an example here, and like, maybe my own is not exactly the right word, but to use an example, as you all know, I recently went to Savannah, and a huge part of my own practice is like herbology, gardening, being able to grow my synthemata, for lack of a better term. And when I was down there, I was like, it was one of the actually major things that I wanted to do was get a cutting from some local flora or fauna in order to, you know, use moving forward. And I got down there, I was like, I would like a magnolia cutting. You know, you think Savannah, you think the South, like a very big thing in your mind. Now, when I actually got down there, I was kind of living in the environment, and I was living with what that environment meant to me. And for me, like, it was a very romantic love focused trip. It was taken like right before I got engaged to my fiance. So that was like a very present aspect of my mind. And when I got down there and I was looking for my magnolia cutting, I really actually like, and I always say that this is like, my mind isn't working well today, but like, it's not, I was just told from some aspect, you should be getting a gardenia, not a magnolia. A gardenia will be more effective for the sort of workings that you are going to use it for. Now, does that mean that I came up with that as the symbol? Like, no, because when you actually look at if you just Google gardenia occult symbology, like things about love, things about purity are consistently coming up. But I didn't actually know that when I was given this information. So does that mean that I came up with it? Like, no, I don't really think that it is, but I do think that my own interpretation of a situation, my own place within it, does have an impact on what you get out of it. That's all to say, like, there is a personal aspect of it for me. Like, I can't deny that. So it's yeah, and I mean, like, that is totally a paradox. I recognize that. But I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts.
I think that there definitely is a personal element to it. And I think that your example was a really good one, partly because even at its most personal, or even in this situation where there was this personal connection that you didn't expect it. It wasn't really that you sat and thought about, well, gardenias, what does that mean? And how can I extrapolate this meaning? Well, if I read a book about gardenias and I find this and that, it was something that you, I mean, in a sense, it sounds to me like when you tell the story, it was almost as if you discovered it rather than. And
that's the way I feel, like that is how I would describe it. You know what I mean? Or I wouldn't even say discovered necessarily, as like the knowledge was imparted to me. Yeah. So like, I think that there's something to be said that like these symbols, and you hear this a lot, and like Mitch Horowitz talks about this a lot, where like these symbols are kind of pre-downloaded into us. You know, like we have the cultural, maybe not cultural is not the right word, but like us as humans come with a cheat sheet, like almost preloaded into us, you know, and I do actually identify very strongly with the idea, and it's just because of situations like that, you know. Yeah. There's a quote from Aleister Crowley that I'm not going to be able to quote it. If I can find it, I'll read it out loud later. But first, I'll just tell you the gist of it. But basically, he and a student were having this we're having a very similar conversation to this, and the student basically asked it in the question of, how come you can summon a spirit and I can summon the same spirit, and we'll end up coming away with two completely different experiences? Does this mean that the spirits are all in our heads? And Crowley's answer was, not really, because you can have the same experience with a friend. If I talk to somebody, I know nothing about music, but a lot about mountain climbing. So maybe we'll talk about mountain climbing for 3 hours. But if you meet that very same friend, and that friend knows you know nothing about mountain climbing, but a lot about music, you might talk about music the whole time. This doesn't mean that the friend is a figment of your imagination. It just means those are the aspects of the friend that you also have in common that you could talk about. If we think about these symbols as like the ways that the gods, or the ways that the spirit world talks to us, then I think the things that we're ready to hear from them will influence what we get, even if that doesn't necessarily mean that we're imagining those things. It just means those are the parts of the thing that we can actually perceive.
I wonder whether Iamblichus's description here of these entities and how they appear to us comes into play here. He does, I think, make a place for the types of synthemata that you're speaking of. But he's also, at one point, he also talks about synthemata, or actually the experiences which are experienced by everyone who's present. He talks about, let's say, for example, I guess the appearance of a god, or the appearance of a daimon. It's not just he himself who sees it, but there's a group of people who actually experience it and see it. And they can talk about having seen this entity for themselves. And I mean, he didn't, at least for Iamblichus, I don't think he wants to take away the notion of personal understanding or personal meaning of these things, but I think he also wants us to be aware that there's the possibility, at least in his experience, that these things can be experienced by everyone who is present.
I mean, I like, I definitely believe that to be the case, but if I'm being honest with you, my practice is like such a personal thing to me. I have never done it in front of anyone else. And I know that some people would say like, oh, that means it's less legitimate, you know what I mean? But like, I don't know, it's odd because to me it is a personal thing. I mean, that's just kind of a comment on that. It doesn't really speak to it either
Sure.
way, but
I've had experiences where, like I saw the devil, for example. Now, and of course I was on a drug or whatever, and I don't think that other people saw it, but it was pretty meaningful to me to have that experience, and I'm still think it's very, very meaningful. But have I ever been in a situation where everyone was able to see something like that? I can't say that I have. I want to.
yeah,
And hopefully we can get together and maybe we can experience that in and of ourselves. But have anyone, Matt, Farzana, have you ever had that type of experience?
For me, not collectively. It's always been personal. But then I've never done this with anybody. I do my practices on my own. It's quite an intimate thing for me. But I think it's more about kind of distinguishing the differences for me. Like I'm very interested in that because I think it's important, because if it is in a group setting, it's important for me to be able to distinguish, what is it that has appeared before me? What am I sensing? What am I seeing? How is that experience for me? But I haven't done it collectively with anyone yet. And with the symbols, I haven't had experience of that either. But I do tend to have a natural affinity towards rocks and stones, crystals and metals. So I do tend to gravitate towards those. I haven't used them in any kind of ritual or any kind of prayer or anything like that, but I do tend to gravitate towards those in the natural world, from the natural world.
Question for Zana. You've talked a lot about your relationship with the Arabic alphabet and how that can be like implemented in these sorts of practices. Do you see that at all as being like a good parallel to sort of a synthematic? I don't know. I'm going to call it synthematic approach to the divine.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, but I think what happens, the reason that things externally are not generally used is because I think that what happens is through the sounds, it creates the form, but that form, which is the symbol, I would say, is in the unseen world. So if this series of vowels and sounds and vibrations are creating something, then it is being created in the unseen realm, but it's very much there. I haven't seen them myself, but I can for sure palpate them, meaning sense them. So when there are, what's really interesting though, within the Arabic language and in the Quran, each verse is called an ayah, which is a sign. And I would say, is that the same thing as a symbol, or are they both signs and symbols? Because from my experience, I think that it's creating them. And I feel I feel like it is being created, but in the spiritual world. So maybe that's why it's not directly used within these type of practices that I do. But then there is reference to it in magic, when there's lots of references to the lunar magic and different types of magic. They use lots and lots of different things, like saffron and gold and silk and things like that.
How does a book of correspondences fit into this? I mean, there's an essay which I've been looking at. It talks about the correspondences that you can look up and identify, saying, okay, well, I want this certain effect. So if I get these materials together, I can actually produce that effect.
Yeah, I think that those books of correspondences can be useful for inspiration and to see what the traditional associations are. But I think it can be more direct to go the route that Ryan was kind of talking about earlier, of finding, as best you can, where you find that meaning. There's a certain kind of view that you can take on of seeing things in the world as a type of window or a type of portal to different meanings and sort of principles. And you're not necessarily deciding arbitrarily what these meanings or principles are. It's the way that it's being shown to you. And if you can learn how to find that in your experience, what to contemplate, if you can learn how to locate that as a personal experience, then you don't need to rely quite so much on those books of correspondences. Or at the very least, those books of correspondences can just become jumping off points for you to take a few examples of a certain type of thing and run with it. So, for instance, if you look up a book of correspondences for herbs, you might see that goldenrod is considered to be solar. Okay, well, you can say, okay, well, goldenrod is a plant that grows in sunny places, and it's bright yellow. Okay, you're kind of getting an idea. This lets you, if you can understand why goldenrod is solar, you can think about, well, what else around me has that? And you can contemplate and look around in your own life and say, well, maybe sunflowers, maybe sunflower seeds. Oh, what about seeds in general? Seeds are pretty, they're in the center of things and they're generative, they're life-giving. You can keep elaborating out in finding things that are not in the books based on what's in the books, but only because those books are just pointing you at something. I think this view of being able to find the ways that things are portals is the source of those books. And if you can develop that skill, it's much more useful than only going by what's in the books.
Yeah, I love that. I second it wholeheartedly. I would say the books are like an excellent jumping off place if you're just starting. They're a good way of kind of assessing the sorts of things that are associated with a particular, element of the divine. But they're by no means the end-all be-all. And like you said, Matt, like the way Crowley talks to his holy guardian angel might look wholly different than the way I speak with my Agatha Daimon, but we can assume that those things are commensurate,
Yeah. And speaking of which, I also found that quote. Which,
lovely.
Is it okay if I read that real quick?
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is from his book, Magic Without Tears. And he says, I can post the link in the chat too. He says, let me say in particular, in regard to gods, that the god Jupiter whom you invoke is not necessarily the same as he whom I invoke. It is clear in any case that the revelation of himself to you is modified in many ways by your own particular sensitiveness. Just as in ordinary life, your idea of a friend may be very different from my own conception of the same individual. Suppose, for example, he happens to be a musician. There will be an entire side of his character to which I am practically insensitive. You could talk to him for hours, and I would understand little or nothing of what was said. Similarly, if he were a mountaineer, it would be your turn to be the odd man out.
Right. Yeah, I actually love that. That's great. Crowley has those nuggets of wisdom. People like to hate on him, but He's got some good stuff.
I like this particular book because it's a series of letters, and so he's speaking plainly instead of hiding it under 12 million layers of obscure literary allusions and like terrible 19th century speechifying. It also has some other parts which are a little bit worse, but in general, it's a good book.
You said it's called Magic Without Tears?
Yeah.
Yes, I posted the link in the chat to free HTML
cool.
like retyping of it.
I mean, there's just so many things about Crowley which are not to like. That
complex guy.
It goes beyond complex. The way his treatment, he's a misogynist. My daughters and I were reading his novel, Moonchild, and both of them couldn't get through it because of the misogyny.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
it's for good measure.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much negative, and he's destroyed people's lives. Who was it? Neumann, I think that was the last name. He was a psychological basket case after having his relationship with Crowley. But I digress. But having said that, I'm sorry. I am digress. I'm going to digress with my digression. I am still hoping to find within Crowley good things. I mean, I have several of his books I definitely want to pursue and look at.
Well, if nothing else, it's super cool that you're reading that with your daughter, even if they don't like it. Like, they go, that's. I hope to have that relationship with my children. You know.
Well, they're both atheists, so.
Okay, there you go.
I have, of course, come across him. He's not really someone that I find any kind of resonance with. But there was something. There was his. I think it was his tarot deck that I was interested in, and the corresponding book that went with it. And it was really, really weird because something. So I was, even though I felt like not very comfortable with any of his work, there was a part of me that wanted his deck in particular. It had to be that one because that is what was really kind of catching my attention. But then when I went to order it and I went to get the corresponding book, it was almost as if there was a stop, like no. And then I went to order the book, I think separately, and then that was also a really very direct no. And it's very strange because I had paid for both of them, but both transactions ended up getting cancelled. And I just thought, okay, that when that happens, it's like, that's not the way. You don't need to go there. Like, you don't need to read his stuff. There are other ways, and if it comes to you, then it will come to you. But don't look that way.
It's so funny. It's so funny you say that, Farzana, because I picked up his tarot deck a couple of years ago, and it was just like I practice tarot all the time. I'm like quite experienced in it, and I just was like getting such hostility from the deck to the point where I gave it away to one of my friends, to the point where he gave it away to one of his friends.
Oh, that is so strange. Yeah,
I don't know where it exists now, but I want nothing to do with it.
It just has a very, very different type of energy to it. But because of the art and the energy of the symbols, it was very much it was attracting me. There was something there. But I don't know if it was if the answer was not right now, focus on this way, and at some point maybe. But I still find that out of all of the decks that I kind of came across, that was the one that really kind of grasped my attention the most. That's really funny. What you say.
That is. I'm actually glad that I have independent confirmation of feelings on that. Anyways, I actually wanted to. Sorry, go ahead. Well, I was just gonna say, if there's anyone else that wants to make a comment on Crowley, by all means. But I kind of want to just go back to like the practicing as a group, the like multiple people seeing the same entity. And I just wanted to say, like, while I've not experienced that in and of itself specifically, I have experienced some things that could maybe be construed as similar. And I'm going to use an example that happened to me actually over the holidays. I haven't, like, I've been practicing less than I would like lately, so it was very important to me before the New Year's to at least do some sort of practice, kind of specifically aimed at like revelation, direction, that sort of thing. I took a ritual from my Book of Hermetic Magic, adapted PGM materials, and it's just called Revelation. It's PGM 12, 153 to 160. And actually got really great results with it. Did my ritual down at there was on my parents' property. There's the headwaters of a river. So I created a little temple space down there for myself to practice whenever I'm at their place, and went down there, did the ritual. Went really great. While I was there, didn't have any like direct visionary responses, but definitely like felt it worked. There was a few things that happened that were quite serendipitous, I would say. Go back, go to sleep, and I have an incredibly vivid dream, which is really what I was going for. And it was the whole kind of revelation that I was driving towards was about my relationship with my home. You know, I think the holidays are such an important time for that, and it like really kind of encapsulates that energy. So that it was perfect. I also have, as I say, my herb, my garden. I have a Benjamina plant that to me represents home perfectly. I took it from a cutting from one of my mom's plants, which she took from a cutting from one of her mom's plants. It has like a very kind of direct family lineage. And so I have this dream. I can get into it if you guys want. But the revelation that I really came to through it was distance with love. You know what I mean? Like not being directly present a lot of the times, taking a step away. And while I was having this dream, next morning, Miriam wakes up and she's like, I had the craziest dream last night. I dreamt that we sold our house and moved away to Costa Rica, you know, and like mine was a much more symbolic, esoteric, I would say, like visionary experience. But I just found it very interesting that she had a similar typology of dream at the same time that I was having this revelatory one. I don't know I don't know what you guys have to say to that. I'm sure that some people would roll their eyes at the experience, but I just wanted to say it because, like, I think that we often do practice these things on our own as like magical people in the modern world. Which means that, yeah, you don't necessarily have that like independent confirmation. But if you do look at your life in context and you look at the things that are happening around you, you might often see, and I'll use the word, a symbol of that same thing happening in your own life. So, yeah, just want to bring that up.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting that you just said that, because just before you were going to say that, I was just going to bring up Carl Jung and the dreams and symbols in his books, because that's really the most direct experience that I've had with the symbolic realm. And that's what I always look out for my dreams, because it's a communication from our souls, I would say, and it's so symbolic. And there are different types of dreams, and they all have a different type of feel to them. So when you were saying that that dream was very kind of esoteric and symbolic. I really kind of got that vibe. And I always look out for those type of dreams because I find that they're the most useful and most important and most significant for me in my inner world. And that always kind of is reflected to me when I have these very clear, vivid, I remember all the details. It's very much has a different feel to other types of dreams. Some dreams are compensatory, where they feel like, it's just things that happen during the day, and it's just, me compensating all the overload maybe sometimes. Sometimes they are premonitions, and I get a glimpse of, what might be coming or what events may unfold, things like that. Some tend to be very much about what's happening for somebody else. So I always look out for that. And I'm very much into the dream symbolism. And I find that what you were saying about how the practices can have a direct impact on someone close to you. I mean, that's definitely been my experience. Like, I can see how certain things are coming out in my children, how this has had an impact on my husband, and, things like that, because I'm very much aware of it. And sometimes I can see the positive impact of that. And, sometimes there are some negatives as well. And dream sharing, like when you're a couple and you have a dream and they have a similar one, I certainly think you're both kind of having the same dream with different facets. So that's really an area that I'm interested in as well. I find it quite fascinating.
Yeah, I like the idea of like the same dream in different facets. That is, I think, quite illustrative of what at least I interpreted that experience as.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't mind just sharing some of the symbolic
yeah,
kind
of course. I mean, like I can give you a whole rundown if you want. So, fall asleep, and I think that like a very important aspect of any sort of dream like this that I have had is that like it seems to happen as soon as you close your eyes to go to sleep. And like you say, it is highly vivid and you remember it clearly afterwards. And I think that's like such an important part of it. So in the dream, and it's funny because I always hug my pillow when I fall asleep. And, go down to fall asleep, open my eyes, and instead of hugging a pillow, I'm hugging a huge deer, female deer. I'm from the, central Ontario. Again, this was all about, home, family, these sorts of things. I've always had such a strong association with the deer at my place. And holding on to the deer, lying with it, it gets up. I keep my hand on it, and it leads me out of the forest until once we get to the edge of the forest, it runs, and I can't keep up with it. And I watch it, run off into the horizon, it disappears, and I wake up. Yeah, and to me, it was just that feeling of exodus. A feeling of exodus, while at the same time, the connection and understanding the value in the space that we started in, and knowing that that will always be there for me. I will always have that as home, but sometimes you need to run. Yeah, that was my most recent experience.
Really, it does have that feel to it, like when you were explaining what it meant for you. Yeah, it does. I mean, do you know what the deer might have represented? Was it home itself, or
Actually, I think it was my mother specifically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get too deep into that aspect of my psychology, but
yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah,
no problem.
Really, thank you.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's a little deeper than what I was going to say, which is just that I've only very rarely done magic with other people, and similarly, I've never had a direct experience of seeing the same thing at the same time as somebody else. But what has been shared is the results, because when it works, it's really obvious. And actually, now that I'm talking about it, it's a little bit more similar to the dream thing than you might think, because I find that a magical result has certain qualities when they happen that are sort of similar to the qualities of a dream that are a magical result. Sort of like when you have the dream very quickly, when you fall asleep, and then you can remember it. I find oftentimes a magical result in real life will have this kind of strange, memorable quality to it, which is almost a little bit surreal. Like you're in the Truman Show, and reality is like staging this for you, so that you're right in the right place at the right time for this thing to happen to you and for you to notice it. But that aspect of the result, I think, is what has been shareable for me, not really experiences in a ritual of like a spirit appeared in front of me and we both agreed that he was wearing a pointy hat.
Right.
Interesting.
Just on just quickly on the dream and the herb topic, I have looked into dream herbs, and there are some like central ones, and some of them really do work. So if anyone wants to kind of have a go of those, I think
Sure.
some of them produce really wild dreams.
Send them along.
Yeah. and it's really cool. And it's just sometimes like there's just a blank period where, I just haven't had a dream. I haven't used them for a long time, actually. But then I just I'm not really sure how you're meant to use them. I think you're meant to make it into a tea. But I got just a feeling of smoking them, like putting them into I don't know if just rolling them up and just kind of inhaling the the smoke, and that really that night, I would just have these wild dreams. So it's actually just really cool. I just thought I'd put that in there.
To that point, Farzana, a while back, I live in the Village in Toronto. Obviously, there's lots of well, I mean, let's be honest, that's why I've been able to interact with so many other witchy type people. Lots of people that are into alternative thoughts and lifestyles around here. But so we have a sort of like a cult market once a month nearby, and I bought from a local witch at the start of the summer. It's called the Intuitive Witch, and it is specifically meant to smoke before you sleep. It's a mix of mullein, mugwort, and skullcap. And it definitely gives me some crazy dreams. So
right. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Mullein, mugwort, and skullcap.
Can you smoke that?
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't have the skull cap, but yeah.
Got the other ones. Yeah, the other ones are quite like they are more common, like the ones that I've heard of. But the ones in that are specifically for the dreams have they're just known as dream herbs. I mean, I guess lots of different herbs will probably give you different types of dreams, but these ones I'd never heard of them before. So I'll put them up, but I'm not familiar with the names.
Very much
definitely.
Less. Oh, good. Yeah. Very much less romantic, less natural, and less witchy, and more modern, I guess. But vitamin B6 as well. If you take vitamin B6 supplement before bed, it will also make dreams much more vivid and memorable.
I used to have to take that for cutting weight in wrestling, and I had some. Young Ryan was floored by some of the experiences he had while taking B6.
Now, this is so the dreams are definitely a part of what the occult is about, right? Because if you look at the PGM, which is the Greek magical papyri, there are many incantations for dreams and different ways of trying to induce dreams in others or in oneself, etc. So it's definitely falls within this tradition of magic that we're looking at, theurgy. Whether we look at those as symbols, as synthemata, I think is an interesting question. I
think I would say dreams and visions, I think, I think that I would say dreams and visions, I think that 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 I I think visions are
Mm-hmm.
different to dreams. So I think that
Mm.
I think it falls under both of those categories, like a very important area, very, very important, dreams and visions.
Yeah,
I never thought of.
also,
I'm sorry. Just wanted to say, I had never thought of those as synthemata per se, but I understand that Proclus, the follower of Iamblichus, seemed to indicate that states of consciousness were a synthemata as well. Sorry, just wanted to say that.
that's really interesting. Yeah, I think the dreams, the importance of dreams to magic, this is something I've been thinking about lately in these terms. I don't know if there's a passage where Iamblichus talks about this explicitly, but I think that we can get there implicitly by saying if the Neoplatonic vision of reality is that there's the one at the top and the one emanates out all these various layers until you get to concrete material reality sort of at the end as the final product, and that if there are these beings which exist on those intermediate levels like gods and heroes and daimons, then we can say that in some ways these beings precede material reality and are part of shaping it and giving rise to it. I think part of the importance of dreams and visions and things like that in magic, I think you can relate that to this scheme. There's a temptation to think that the world is just here, and sometimes there are dreams happening sort of inside of the already formed world. But I think a lot of these things about symbolon and or whatever the plural for that would be, and synthemata, symbola, I guess, and synthemata. I think a lot of the way that you can explain why they would be powerful, and similarly why dreams and visions might be powerful as well, is because the point is that they are going to connect you to these layers which precede material reality. So it's not as though you have a material universe and then inside of the material universe you have this symbol, and somehow this symbol is going to like push stuff around inside of the material universe. It's actually more that this symbol is a connection, a portal, a wormhole that connects to these spiritual forces which come before the materialization of the universe, so that you are actually pulling things into manifestation that do not yet exist, or you're altering the strings, the threads connect from the source of existence to the actuality of whatever just currently happens to be the case. Yeah. I think that these symbols, themata, dreams, and visions all share this quality. Yeah.
Well, that's why Hecate is considered a god, a goddess, right, of the Trinity, because she brings dreams and she brings omens and oracles, and she is at the source. She's part of this Trinity of the of the primordial fire, and then you have Hecate. This is in the Chaldean hierarchy, and then you have the demiurge, and she brings both the primordial fire and the demiurge together. But as part of that, her energy and what she emanates are dreams and oracles to guide you back to the primordial fire, to guide you back to the oneness.
And very similar, I would argue, with Hermes too. I mean, that's why you would have the Hermetic philosophers and Hermes Trismegistus being sympathized with the god Hermes. Any of these beings who are going back and forth between boundaries. Yeah.
I mean,
to that point, guys, if we're talking about topics moving forward, Chaz, I would love to hear a little, because it sounds like you have quite the relationship with Hecate, and it's one that I've always really thought was conceptually amazing, but I have had very little successful experience actually directly working with Hecate, so I'd love to get your thoughts on that sometime. Yeah,
I could do that. But before that, bringing up this discussion of dreams, which is what I did my master's thesis on, dreams in Wittgenstein. And no, it's not as dry as it sounds.
Well, I'm going to be on academia.edu tonight looking for that.
It wouldn't be there. This was in a very small journal. It was published in a very small journal in England. I just happened to pull them out of a hat, and because they said, "Hey, that sounds interesting, send it to us," so I did. And it goes way back. But yeah, you can, be under the Wittgensteinian interpretation of dreams. What was interesting, but yes, it takes in Freud. Wittgenstein knew Freud, didn't like Freud for all kinds of reasons, and it wasn't because he was Jewish, because Wittgenstein was half Jewish. It was just he didn't like his thinking, the way that he thought, and so he had some real strong disagreements with Freud's interpretation of dreams. But what I did was I took it with dreams and anthropology, and I studied the Huron understanding of dreams. And here, within Huron and Native American society, often, not just Huron, the Huron nation, but in many Native American societies, dreams were paramount. People literally, they governed by dreams. And which is, to me, mind-blowing that you could run a society or a community based on dreams. But they did so, and they did so very, I would say, except for their encounter with the Europeans, they did so quite well. So, yeah, I would like to definitely do some interesting topic on dream, because I've been reading a few things about hypnagogic state and dreams and how it relates to magic. And I think it obviously fits right into what we're discussing here.
Yeah, I think it would be a good topic to kind of go over. Yeah.
So well, that sounds like a breaking point, unfortunately. I apologize for that. I thought we were going very well there, but it seems like we have a good place to stop until next time. But let's keep communicating. Let's keep communicating on the channel. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and really appreciate it, and take a listen to our other episodes as well. Thank you for joining the discussion tonight. I hope you found it as exciting as I did. We don't just want to talk about these things, of course. We want to make them as real as they were when Iamblichus experienced the very divine presence. Join us next time as we continue our exploration of theurgy and the divine.